All right. This is another one in the product engineering series. Technical North Star metrics is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to start with a production question that I want to pose to you. If a server is at 100% CPU at 2 a.m., should you wake up and do something about it? Should you have your NOC or Network Operations Center call you, or get PagerDuty to call you and get you out of bed because we've got 100% CPU on our cluster? Have a think about that. Now, the response I usually get from my guys when I ask them this question is, it depends. And it does depend, but what does it depend on? And usually we go back and forth a bit and we come back to, well, what's actually happening? What's the user experiencing while this is happening? And that's an interesting response. The next one that I want to pose is, you've just deployed something, right? And now you're seeing a huge spike in errors in your logs. Should you roll back? Now, a lot of people would say yes. But again, when I talk to my guys about this and pose this question, it usually comes back to is depends again. Because if you're getting a big spike in errors because someone just added an extra error log to the code that they should have been an info, then probably you don't need to roll back. And probably you can just delete that line of code and deploy another version and save yourself some headache. But again, it depends. These are some things to think about. And it all comes back to the business impact. So we're solving a lot of these problems and we're asking a lot of these questions, and it primarily comes back to the business impact. And this is where we start to run into communication problems, because we have business versus technical language. And a lot of what we were talking about before was technical. So business usually focuses on things like revenue, growth, and user satisfaction. Whereas engineers tend to focus on things like how things work with latency, CPU usage, uptime, error rates, things like this. And for me, the difference between the two is a top-down versus a bottom-up perspective on how systems work. So the business usually focuses on what the systems do that matter to the business. What's the outcome they're producing for the user? Whereas engineers tend to look bottom-up, like how the technical components work internally and affect that outcome. So this communication gap generally leads to misaligned priorities, difficult justifying technical investments, confusion about incident priority, and a challenge in measuring the engineering impact. So this leads us into what I think is part of the solution, at least, is technical North Star metrics. So what is a North Star metric? It's a single metric that connects technical work to business value. And used right, it becomes ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means it's language that's spoken everywhere. And it correlates directly with business success and is actionable. So in companies where I've seen this work, your North Star metric becomes like a currency that's used everywhere. And everyone is talking about it. And whenever they're talking about the work they're doing, this number comes up, or this metric, whatever it is. So some real world examples. So Netflix use total watch time. So whenever they're experimenting or looking at incidents, they're asking about questions about what was the impact we had on total watch time. Gmail, and this is a pretty common one as well, use things like daily active users. At Agoda, it's an e-commerce company. We use bookings. Bookings is a very common one for e-commerce companies. So let's look at it in real use in a product sense. So these type of metrics can be used to A/B test for product experiments. An example is measuring total watch time on an A versus B variant of an experiment at Netflix, for example. So the incremental addition of business value through the results of experiments. For example, I might say my experiment added 40 hours total watch time per day. That's a measure of impact on the business of success. And it's a very impactful statement to make. As an engineer, if I can say, look, I added 40 hours of total watch time to Netflix daily, that's like, wow, I'm measuring myself by a bottom line business impact, which is very powerful and impactful statement for engineers. In tech, one of the things that we can do with these North Star metrics is look at the absence of success of them versus what people usually use as the presence of errors. This is actually one of my pet peeves. Some of my engineers, at least, whenever we've got an incident, the first thing they do is they go and check error logs. It's like, oh, there must be some errors. Well, there's not always errors, and it's not always the best place to start. And this is something we tend to focus on a little bit too much, I think, in engineering, software engineering in general. Is if we've got an incident, there must be an error, and let's go find that error, and that'll tell us what the problem is, and then we can fix the problem. Sometimes the error is the server is offline, or we have a latency problem, and sometimes there's no error because someone's got to try catch with an empty catch statement, or sometimes there's no error because we're not getting traffic. Something has stopped the traffic for some reason, or moved the traffic somewhere else, and sometimes it's just system behavior. So one of the things I've found over the years is the best thing to look at when you want to know if there's something wrong is not how many errors you're getting or how many non-200 responses you're getting, but what's the absence of successful responses, right? So working out how you can get some sort of baseline of what your successful target should be for right now, and then how far are you off that target, right? So if you can get there, you can make statements like, the database server going down cost us 400 bookings. And when you can get to that point, now you're talking the same currency as product, right? And they're talking about, experiments adding this metric. You're talking about incidents or bugs taking it away. And it starts to get easier to prioritize, what work needs to get done to help the business move forward. When tech and products start talking the same currency, it helps. But the question is, how did we get the loss amount? How did we calculate loss? And I'll talk about that in the next section. But now we come back to the question on my server is on 100% CPU, should I wake up? And it's easier to answer now, right? Because we can ask the question, is there any business impact? We can answer that with, is there active users drop? Is there a drop in watch time? Is there a drop in bookings? Now we can easily tell, should someone at knock or PagerDuty wake you up and say, hey, you need to look at this now. So I'll go into a bit of a deep dive of implementation of loss as a currency. So I'll talk about the measuring methodology first, because one of the things I spoke about was, how to measure the absence of success. So if you're looking at the absence of success, static thresholds generally don't work. Because if it's a business metric, you're going to get different user volumes throughout the day. So if you try and set a static threshold, it's going to have to be at 4 a.m. or something like that when your traffic's at the lowest. And if you set a static threshold at 4 a.m., you're always going to get woken up at 4 a.m. when there's a problem, because it's only going to be at 4 a.m. when your static threshold is when your traffic is at its threshold that'll go below the static threshold. You'll also have a problem with weekends versus weekdays too. So we need some sort of dynamic threshold. So what I've used in the past, and I'll go into an example today, is a rolling 4-week average of X minute windows for a dynamic threshold. So an example is, we might look at an average number of bookings that we get between a 9 a.m. and a 9:30 window for that particular day, whether it be Monday or whatever, for the last 4 Mondays over the last 4 weeks, and then we assume that we should hit around that number, today, because it's a Monday as well, or whatever day of the week it is. You could experiment and go back to 8, 12 weeks or more. It really depends on your growth. Going too far back might lower the bar too much if you're growing pretty fast. So it depends. You can experiment with it. And this works for top-down metrics, right? So if we're looking at things like orders processed, messages sent, things like that, total watch time that we spoke about before. So here's an example dashboard. I thought it would be best to look at something real. Here what we can see is the chart on the top right. So the time window we're using for this particular system is the entire day. It's 24 hours. The reason that we're doing that is because the number's pretty low. So in this particular North Star metric for this system, it's only getting about 500-600 a day, sometimes peaks up to 700. But you can see that the yellow bar there that's the 4-week average. So we expect that we'll hit that or go above, and it should be within some range of that, and that's what we tweak, and that's how we set the little panic level widget there in the top left. Down the bottom is, because this one's a little bit noisy, because it's the full 24-hour window, and it's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to show it to you, because even if you're a small company and a startup and you're getting 500, 1,000 bookings a day, as an e-commerce startup, something like that, you can still start to use this kind of stuff. I used to work for a lot of small e-commerce startups many decades ago, and this would still work. It does mean it's a little bit longer that you find that you've actually got a problem. So that's why these guys have built the one down the bottom, which is looking at the volumes throughout the day where the windows are a bit larger. You can also see on here, there looks like there's a production incident. This is the other reason why I wanted to show this. So there's 2 dips there, one around the 24th and 25th of December, and the other one's around the 31st of December and January, public holidays. One of the issues that you run into with using something like this is seasonality. So sometimes you'll get public holidays and you'll get dips, and you need to account for that. You could try and automatically account for that if you've got a lot of historical data, but what I tend to find is, it's just something you say, well, that's a public holiday. It happens a couple of times a year, and you just move on. It's not worth automating. So that's an example. I'll continue with the example of e-commerce as well. So one of the things that I've had working with companies in the past is that sometimes the booking numbers are really low. So it's talked about small companies, a couple hundred bookings a day. Another thing that I've used in the past is step conversion with e-commerce. So if you're working on e-commerce, generally you've got some kind of conversion funnel that people are coming through. A basic example would be landing page or search page, product page, payment page, confirmation page, and you've got this funnel. You can look at the incremental conversion or the step conversion between each of these pages. And also what I've seen people do as well is weight these. So for example, your step through conversion from payment page to confirmation page is definitely your most highest value one. So maybe you weight that as 3 or 5, whereas landing page to product page you may weight as 1 or something like that. So you can help with the urgency behind the number. If you do that though, be careful of cannibalization, because an example is sometimes people can get an increase in traffic to the payment page quite easily by hiding taxes and fees on the product page. And then you end up with conversion there, but then a drop in conversion of the confirmation page, and it may hide a problem. So if you do something like this and you try and aggregate your step conversion, still look at your individual step conversion. And I'd probably recommend just looking at individual step conversion as opposed to trying to aggregate them. But it depends on your context. It's up to you. So incident management with loss. So now when we have this, we can start to quantify business impact in real time. So the how we get to this loss is, you see when we had those dips, so the bar goes below the yellow bar, or the green bar goes below the yellow target. What we look at is what that gap was. And from that gap, we can see what we didn't get. And sometimes there's a spike a little bit after. And that's, people generally coming back because something was broken and now it's not broken for them. And they can come back and watch their show on Netflix that they were trying to watch, 10 minutes ago. What we generally do, and it's usually a manual process we do because we don't have like a huge amount of incidents per day in a lot of the companies I've worked with, is you look at you kind of work out between that gap minus what came back, and then that is a value of loss for you. So you can put a number of like, there were 400 fewer bookings during this incident, so that leads to this much revenue lost or something like that. It gives you a value in real business impact, and it's the same currency that product is talking in, so that helps in communication. So and prioritization. You may have an ongoing issue. Say for example, this crash in the iOS app is costing us 5,000 daily active users. A statement like that is very impactful. When you're talking with business people, it's like, wow, that's a lot of active users, as opposed to we've got this crash and it's happening, 10,000 times a day. Well, what's the impact of this 10,000 crashes per day? Well, now we can say it's 5,000 active users. And like I said, you can also use this in A/B testing. Generally, with North Star metrics, when I've seen them used with A/B testing, they look at incrementality. So an example might be, hey, I'm adding this many bookings per day or this much total watch time, and measuring it incrementally to justify the new features. Performance improvements as well generally help with e-commerce conversion. So cultural impacts, I think, for me is a big one with this. It helps with engineering motivation, direct business impact or direct visibility on business impact. It fosters ownership and pride for engineers in their work. There's some great work that's been done by Dan Pink on about what motivates people, and one of the things he talks about is having impact as something that motivates people, and it's very true. I've seen it firsthand when we've implemented this at different businesses. And the other reason I like it is it reinforces that you build it, you run it. It really helps engineers connect the things that they're launching or the features they're launching in production to solving the user problem. That, I think, really helps. It also silo breaking collaboration, so it's a shared metric across various teams as well as product managers. So between teams, we can look at, hey, you guys are breaking our X page, which is stopping this many people, accessing the payment page per day. So we're losing this many bookings. So, and then it's like, oh, what's this common language we've got now? Oh, it's that many. That sounds like it's really bad. Clearer decision making. So you've got a unified understanding of severity. You're talking in business impact, not purely technical terms. There is some common pitfalls that I'll talk about. Sometimes it gets too noisy. Be careful you're not choosing a metric that's too broad or too narrow. You may fail to get the big picture. You need to be careful that it's not noisy enough too as well. So you may get a metric that isn't going off and isn't saying, hey, there's a problem when there is a problem. So the other thing is that there is a cultural shift here that you need to manage. So merely tracking a metric without empowering teams to understand the purpose isn't going to work. You need buy-ins from team, you need buy-ins from product to start to create this ubiquitous language. Start setting SLAs and KPIs using the metric. Make it a part of your business process, build tooling around it, make it instantly measurable. One of the mistakes I've seen happen is having to wait 2 days for an ETL to process and tell you the result is too long to react. Maybe it's okay in the start for measuring your A/B test with product work to wait 2 days, but if you're trying to measure production incidents, you don't want to have an incident in production for 2 days before someone goes, hey, there's a problem. So whatever you do, try and focus on building something that's instantly measurable. Something I do with some of my teams is I ask them to ask this question: what does this system do? Right? It's a great place to start. What goal does the customer achieve with this system? What problem does it solve for the customer? What is it doing? An example would be if you're looking at something like a help desk support chat widget, right? What does the chat widget do? You open this chat, you can talk to the customer support, they can help you out. So at its core, what it's doing is it's sending messages, right? And it's displaying them so the users can see them. So it's kind of got those two functions. But you want to kind of look at what's the ultimate goal. Generally, if you're sending and receiving messages, if you're receiving a message, one must have been sent. You want to try to focus on the end goal. If the end goal is achieved, then it's working. You don't want to go too far, though. Like a good example would be with a chat widget for a support desk, the end goal is actually getting customer problems solved. That takes a long time. So if you're focusing on that, it may be a long tail effect that it takes days. So you may want to still monitor that, sure. But you want something that's more instantly measurable. So looking at message delivery is probably a better way to monitor that or measure the success of that application as opposed to incidents resolved. Where it gets hard. So let's look at GitHub, for example, and let's ask this question. What does GitHub do? It does a lot of things, right? It's got Git, it's got issues, it's got project boards, it's got code reviews, it's got CI now. It's got a lot of automation, event-driven stuff. It's got labels. It's got a lot of stuff. So sometimes you're managing things like this that are huge, and it's very hard to find a technical North Star metric for a system like this. What I've seen people try and do is a bit like what we saw with step-through conversion, is try and aggregate all of these actions together, and then turn them into a currency by putting arbitrary weights on what value they have. And it kind of works. The other way that you can look at it as well is that in huge systems like that, they're probably broken down into smaller pieces on the inside. And then you've probably got teams around that. So there's probably a team at GitHub for issues. And they can probably look at a segment of their systems that deal with issues and then look at the experiment on issues and look at issues as an individual thing and then have their own little metric around that. The problem with doing this, though, is it doesn't help when it's cross-team. So let's say we have a problem with a shared piece of infrastructure and as the issues team, I'm measuring issue comments per day or issue interactions per day is my KPI, something like that, right? And then we've got a shared piece of infrastructure that the pull request team has introduced a bug in, and it's not impacting them, but the issues team is having a problem. The issues team is going, well, we're losing 400,000 interactions per day on our issues, and the pull request team is like, what does that mean? We're measuring code review comments per day or something like that. It doesn't help there. So this is where it gets really hard, and I don't have a good answer, but it's something you may run into depending on what your business model and what your application is. Closing. So identifying your North Star. A couple of quick steps. Revisit your core business function. What does this system do? Start asking that question. Maybe it does a couple things and you'll have to break it up a bit, but hopefully you should be able to get to that one thing that you can unite at least most of the teams at the company on. And select a measurable top-down metric that you can put on that. Define thresholds and baselines. Have a look at time windows. I think they're pretty good. But definitely look at something that's dynamic. Unless you've got like constant load throughout the day. If you've got constant load throughout the day, you may have that. You may be a total global company, or you may have just users that are 24 hours a day for some weird reason. Maybe you service 24-hour help desk or something like that. Next steps in engagement. So I'd start with small pilots. I'd do this with anything really. And then expand once you see tangible results. And emphasize bridging the communication gap. That's what you're trying to do. The right North Star metric can transform tech investments into the right business impact. It can really help with communication between product and tech, which is something I think as an industry we need to improve on. Not really just product, but business in general. It's the communication gap I've seen in a lot of companies is always hard. That's it. Thanks. So if you like the content, please like and subscribe, and have a good day.